what you can afford and what you can get. So my guy being a higher class rotolero who's been in the service for a while, he's got his sword, right, which obviously has its basket hilt, which is designed to protect my hand. So that way if somebody tries to slice me, I've got some extra protection there. And it's also got these pieces here where you can trap an enemy sword. So if somebody basically goes to try to stab you, you can basically go horizontally, catch the sword like this, pull it down, and then you can either hit him with your shield, disarm him, and then you can go in, and of course you can thrust and stab him. Okay? And so that's basically what the weapon was designed for. This is what is known as your rodello or rodella, depending on whether you want to use the male or feminine version. It is also known as a buckler. The bucklers tend to be a lot smaller than this. This is about 32 inches long. It's made of steel. And the primary purpose is so you can play instruments, right? It sounds like a gong. No, I mean, obviously the primary purpose is to protect you. Because it's made of steel, it's going to be able to stop cross bolts. It's going to be able to stop, probably not a firelock, but it's about the best that you're going to get. This weighs about 8 pounds. So you got 8 pounds in one hand, about 4 in the other hand. You're fighting pretty much all day with this stuff. Any questions on the armies?
You mentioned crossbow.
Yes. Spanish had crossbowmen. They had archers, not a lot, because Spain wasn't a big archery culture, but they did use crossbows. And crossbows were much more effective in the Indies than they were in Europe. Because in Europe, they developed full plate, so it was a lot harder for a crossbow bolt to hit its mark. But with the Indians being lightly armored, crossbows were very effective. So they did have large numbers of crossbowmen with them. Yes?
Is Cortez buried in the New World or the Old World?
That's a good question. I don't know where he's buried. Yes, ma'am.
Now, what's the other weapon?
The other thing? Okay.
Yeah. 5, 6.
All right. Yeah. You want to take a guess what this thing is?
Pickaxe.
What?
The pickaxe.
Pickaxe.
It's a combination.
This is what is known as a halberd. All right? It's a very common weapon during this time period. The halberd is a combination of 3 weapons in one. On one end, you've got this part, which is a spear. You've got this end, which is an axe used for cutting, right? And then on the other end, you've got it's a hook, right? So basically what you do is, this is primarily used for fighting cavalry, all right? It gives you 3 weapons in one. So if a cavalryman tries to charge you, you can basically plant and you can stab outward, all right? If an infantryman tries to attack you, you can use this to try to find basically gaps in the armor. You can try to penetrate, and you can swing down, swing up, whatever you need to do, slash with it, right? It's a very effective weapon for that. On the other end, you've got the hook. The hook is designed to kill cavalrymen that are nearby but not directly in your line of sight. There's a cavalry guy rides by me, I can grab him like this, I can hook him, I can pull him down to the ground, and then once he's down on the ground, I can kill him. Right? So it's basically 3 weapons in one. Right? As you can see, most of these things are narrow. They're designed to find gaps in the armor. Because during this period, armor was so effective, you need to find ways around it rather than trying to go through it. So each of these has very narrow tip, so that way you can slide it into those little grooves where it's going to be the most effective. Right? So this is what is known as the halberd. And it was very common. In fact, they were still using these even during the time of the American Revolution. There were still officers that would carry these, right, as a symbol of their units. So
they were
this was
made in
what's that?
Were they made here where they were?
Halberds?
Or all of it?
I think that most of them were imported from Europe. Most of them. Yes?
When did Cortez die off in what year?
What did he die? What year?
Yeah. It was killed or diseased or what?
Did he die of old man? I guess.
He did die of disease, but I'm not sure which disease it actually was. Back then it was difficult to get diagnoses of specific diseases because a lot of times people died of what was called consumption, which meant that it was some kind of disease, but we're not really sure which specific one. So it could have been a variety of different causes, or it could have been old age combined with other factors. Right?
There was no medicine or doctors?
They did, but it wasn't like today where they can actually diagnose your illness and give you specific treatments. Most of the time you just got general care. In fact, in many places, what they would do is if you had a sword, they would rub a toad on it. they would get a frog or a toad and they would rub it and squeeze it to get all the juice on it because toads were thought to have healing properties. So you had a combination of modern techniques mixed with old herbalist kind of stuff, old traditional kinds of healing that people would use. So other things I've talked about the breastplate, which is made of solid steel. Breastplate weighs about 20 pounds, so obviously it's going to be pretty substantial. You've got the collar plate. This thing obviously is what's known as a gorget. It's basically designed to keep my neck in one piece, so if somebody tries to cut at me, I've got nice protection there. Right? Does it limit your mobility? Yes, but not so terrible. It's not like a full plate guy that's going to be really restricted. I can still run, I can still jump in this stuff, right? I'm still fairly good. Cortez's guys can still do handsprings in this stuff. So it was heavy, but not so heavy that they were completely burdened down. Helmet, you can see. This is basically a later style conquistador helmet. It's what's known as a Morian helmet. Right, you can see it's got the curve on it, so that way it's very difficult to get a straight hit on it. Everything's going to get deflected to the outside with this helmet. It was also known as the pikeman's pot because it was your standard infantry helmet. It became very common, especially during the Elizabethan period, that a lot of guys would carry these. People in Jamestown wore this. In fact, this was John Smith's favorite helmet. He wore this pretty frequently. So it was used for about the next 150, really about 150 years before it was phased out. They would use other kinds of helmets too, anything from full plate helmets to just basic, circular helmets known as a sallet. They would have used all kinds of different stuff, but all their helmets would have been made of either iron or steel, depending on what the soldier could afford. And the helmet was one of those pieces that you kind of had to have because you always wanted to make sure that your head was protected. Okay. I've got some greaves, as you can see, that protect my legs, right? The greaves basically also made of iron or made of steel, right? They're basically designed to protect my shins, right? Limits my mobility a little bit, but not terrible, right? The whole point of it is just to make sure that you don't get anything there. The shin is one of the narrowest parts where the bone is the closest to the skin. So any special hit, any even a grazing hit that hits there could potentially be deadly. So you always want to make sure that your shins are protected. Some guys would wear what are called tassets, which is armor that extends below and protects the hip high area, or the hip high, or the thigh area. It just depends. It's about personal taste and what you can afford. I don't particularly think they're very useful. They're actually called a groin guard, but they move a lot. So you can imagine if somebody hit it, it would just knock it into your groin. So I don't think it's going to be super effective. I don't particularly wear them very often because I don't think they really protect them.
John Strap.
Right? Some people would wear thigh pieces too if you're like a horseman, but most average soldiers, this is about the most armor that you're going to see when a Cortez's guys. Some people might have armor basically what are called vambraces that cover the wrists in that area, but the problem is it makes it difficult to move. I mean, you want to be able, especially if you're wielding this thing, you want to make sure that you've got all the mobility you possibly can. Yes?
When they see you going on campus with that, are you stopped?
I get funny looks. I get funny looks, but usually no. I think I've done it so much by this point, everybody's like, oh, that's the costume guy. So people are just used to it by now.
Are you getting a lot of enthusiastic students?
They love it. Yeah, they want to put the armor on, and they want to learn all the stories about it, and they want to get their own, and I tell them how expensive it is, and they're like, whoa. So that's why you got to get a job. All right, make us proud. But yeah, it's good because you can see that they enjoy it, and I have students that usually don't pay attention, and when I bring this stuff in, everybody's paying attention. Right? There's nobody on phones. There's nobody doing anything else. Everybody's paying attention. We've got this stuff.
How much does that cost to get home?
Some of the stuff I made, some of the stuff I bought, probably about $600, $600 to $700 total. You add everything together.
So some of that, you actually buy it?
Some of it you can buy. Yeah, there's companies that make it.
So some people actually make it
Yeah.
on the website?
Yeah. They make them based off of museum replicas that they found in various places. The Mexico City Museum has a lot of really good quality pieces that people have made stuff off of. Spain, obviously, Valencia, there's a museum in Valencia that has some good quality pieces that they've made reproduction stuff off of.
Up in America?
There's a museum, I think, is it up by Austin? No, is it in Corpus Christi?
Corpus Christi.
I think it's in Corpus Christi. There's a museum that has some stuff. I think from a Spanish shipwreck.
Yeah, Spanish shipwreck.
But I don't know of how. I as far as, I don't know if those are, if that's more 1700, or if that's around the time period of 1520s, 1510.
Lo alto lo dejamos de los indios, ¿no?
Sí.
Many people get their history through historical fiction.
Yeah.
Is there an author or two that comes?
Not that I'm aware of that's super popular. I'm sure there's probably obscure examples out there of people that have written stuff, but
Aztecs, Summer and so forth. I can't think of the author.
not that I'm aware of. But I'm sure there's probably stuff out there, but nothing that comes to mind immediately.
Is there books, shows books with the names of the actual soldiers that came with Cortez, and I guess the ones that survived? There wasn't that many that survived, actually.
The one I can think of is probably Bernal Diaz. Bernal Diaz has an actual soldier list which talks about individuals. It also indicates several of them that had smallpox. The Spanish knew which ones were afflicted and which ones weren't. So some people have used that as a way to trace the smallpox epidemic in Mexico, which killed off probably about 300,000 people. That 3-4 guys were responsible for it, and that those same 3 guys died on the Noche Triste. So it's certainly possible to imagine those 3
What's the name of
guys.
the book, I'm sorry?
What?
What's the name of the book?
Conquest of Mexico, Bernal Diaz.
Conquest of New Spain. Bernal Díaz de Castillo.
Yes.
Do you know if any of Cortez's ancestors are still alive in the valley?
Descendants, yeah.
In the valley?
Here.
You're related to Cortez, yes?
Excuse me? Not to Cortez,
Okay.
to the sister of his first wife.
Okay.
No, as far as, I don't think there are any, not that I have ever read about. You know, he went back, eventually back to Spain, he died in Spain.
Cortez?
Yeah.
And that's what it says here in Google, that he died, it was around 60, 61, and he died at Castilla de la Cuestas in the Seville province. And he died of a particular disease, and it's, I believe, pronounced pleurisy.
Oh, pleurisy.
Pleurisy. So it's
Inflammation of the lungs.
Yeah, a membrane around the lung.
Yeah.
And he died of that in December 2nd, 1547.
He was 62 years old. I mean, he was relatively young.
He was around 62.
I mean, for a man.
But you know, in that
62?
That time, 62 was not bad.
It's awfully young.
Life expectancy, 1520s, about 40.
Yeah, he lived to be,
35, 40.
what was interesting to me was that the King of Spain, whoever the king was, did not trust the current king
Charles
at that time, did not trust Columbus, did not trust Cortez, because these guys were thinking out the box. I was just wondering, I heard rumors that Cortez was actually trying to find something similar to an empire that he conquered in Mexico City, and that he was looking for that particular empire in the northern part, which is America, you know, the United States.
Interesting.
Have you run across any
I
particular
haven't got
documents?
any information on that.
Okay. Because he was trying to, in other words, he learned some serious lessons. In Mexico, you did touch on it. You know, the governor of Cuba countered him and took away some of his glory. So he was trying to redo what he did in Mexico City, but north of the Mexican border right now. That guy had the neck and the brain power and the behavior to have declared himself king of the Americas.
Yeah.
He had that ability. It's interesting how far he got.
Anything else? There's one piece of equipment I didn't talk about. On the back, my gourd. Right? You know what that's for?
Water.
That's my water. Now, obviously, there were some native traditions that the Aztecs or that the Spanish did adopt. One of them was the use of gourds for water, which was also carried on by the Mexican army later. Right? Obviously, the big problem was if you kept things in steel, steel gets hot. In the tropics, one of the best things you can use is a gourd. The gourd, obviously, once you line it with beeswax, Very effective, keeps the water cool, even if it's really hot outside. It's going to be a lot better. Water's going to be better quality than what you're going to get otherwise. And so these guys basically started adopting these from natives. They're Tlaxcalan allies, and they found out that it was far better than the stuff they brought with them from Europe. So for many of them, they basically adopted it. They also would carry some kind of a bag, as you can see here. The bag, which you can basically keep stuff in. You can keep dice for playing. They would keep stuff to start fires. They would also carry another bag, which I didn't bring with me, but kind of like a haversack, which they would carry their bedroll. They could carry a few days' rations in, that kind of stuff. But most of the time, they're going to have to live off the land.
What were they eating? They'd have to steal their own food.
They had to live off the land most of the time, so whatever their native allies could procure, because they were the ones that were responsible for foraging. So they might they found wild turkeys, they might eat that if they're lucky, real lucky, whatever fruits and vegetables they would encounter. Bread, they had most of the supplies they would bring with them were wheat products, various kinds of bread they would take with them, usually hard kinds of bread that would last for several days.
Dry meat, dry fish.
Usually salted pork was used, and they would use the stuff that could last for a while, nothing that was particularly tasty. They had to basically survive for it.
Can you put that on yourself, or do you have to have something?
All this stuff, I have a lot of assistants. Yes. I have many helpful people that help me, particularly my girlfriend, who's invaluable. And one of the things I always tell her is, I was like, you are reenacting a historical event. What a better way to get involved in hands-on history than do it. You would have had to have assistants.
So the soldiers would help each other?
They would either help each other or they would have servants that would help them out.
Have you had your DNA done, and do you know what nationality you're from?
I'm German, Dutch, Irish, and Welsh. So my mom's family traced back to the Grants. So my mom is a cousin of Ulysses S. Grant. My dad's side goes all the way back to Benjamin Rush and the American Revolutionary War. So that's about as far back as we went. And a lot of common farmer people. Because they all have big hands. That was one of the things that, it's interesting because a lot of my students always say, oh, I'm related to so-and-so. And I was like, and you're also, of the 9 out of 10 people you're related to were farmers and bakers and common people, because those are the people that made the world go round. So. Anything else? Other questions? Last time you're going to have a conquistador to talk to you. Got it. Bring him out.
Can we take pictures of you and your girlfriend?
Sure. Yeah. There's one last thing I will talk about, which is this is my Under Armour piece, which is what's known as a gambeson. Right. The gambeson basically it's basically made of quilted cotton or linen in this case. It's made of linen. Basically, it's quilted so that it's nice and puffy, gives you some protection, but it also is kind of your underthing. It protects you not only from other people, but also protects you from the armor, because the armor tends to chafe and tends to cut you up really bad. I've also got, of course, this piece here. I've got wool pants, right? And the wool pants have also come equipped with a codpiece, which was very popular in the 15th century, all right? Most people wore pants that was known as hose, that was actually not pants like we think of it. They were divided in half. So imagine having a right pant and a left pant. Then you had a codpiece, which you would use to tie them both together. All right? And so that's the problem. Most pants actually had an open crotch on them. All right? So some medieval people would literally just walk around with their underwear hanging out. But that was a sign that you were a peasant, that you were poor. If you were wealthy, you wore a codpiece. Codpiece basically gives you a little bit of
Cover.
Support.
And also it makes it a little bit larger, so that when you walk around, you can actually show people, look at this. Any interested women that want to participate. But also it gives you some protection, which is the big thing. The reason you have to have one is because otherwise you would just have an open crotch, because the hose literally just ties together to each other. That was medieval pants. It takes a long time to put them on. They're not super practical, but that's what people wore in the 14th.
So you could stuff it with a sock or something.
Yep.
Were they embarrassed at that time?
There's actually a game they would play in Florence, and it was kind of like a predecessor of football. They had a ball, and then everybody would like literally try to tackle each other, except there was no rules. So people would punch each other. And basically one of the things that you would do to try to distract the guy with the ball if you couldn't get to him was there's a little cord on the codpiece here, and if you pull that, the whole thing comes undone. So what you do is you try to grab that cord and pull it so the codpiece will come up and the pants will fall down. So it was real easy to embarrass people in the 1500s to just pull their cod.
Did Cortez have any cannons?
He had what he basically called falconets, and they were basically ship cannons that had been taken off the ships, and they put little rollers and they pushed them. But the Spaniards didn't want to push them because it was too much work. They made the Indians push them. And then when they needed to fight, they could put them in a position and they could fire. But they weren't super accurate, and he never had more than like 10 or 12. They were mostly there for the scare factor.
Scare factor.
Yeah, they weren't super accurate. It wasn't like Civil War cannons where they can hit at 800, 700 yards. These things were more like, you're just going to fire a grape shot at them, especially if they get close, and hopefully that's going to scatter them. And that's largely, in several battles, Battle of Tonga, the falconet saved them multiple times. So they're very inaccurate, they're very tiny, but they did play a big role, particularly in scaring the Indians and morale.
They did.
I have a question.
Yes?
Did the Spaniards not admire the city? I mean, the city was already built
Yes.
and controlled the flood, the water, potable water supply,
Yep.
infrastructure and so forth. They saw no ingenuity there of the savages.
They did, but you said it with the last part, savages. They ate people, they were pagans, and especially in the Middle Ages, if you look back, this is before the Byzantines, before the monasteries that were collecting all the great works and preserving them, if you read what the Romans said, you didn't do it because the Romans were pagans. And so obviously, these are pagans. The Aztecs are pagans, so anything they say is from the devil. So yes, they saw some engineering capabilities, but they also saw from the religious angle that I'm going to go to hell if I actually listen to the stuff that these guys are talking about. Now, we were able to save some of the manuscripts because the Franciscan monks actually would sneak Aztec codexes out in their clothing. They would put them in their underwear so that way they didn't get caught. Because if they were caught, they could be put to death for heresy. Because using pagan technologies was looked at as being heresy, as well as worshiping pagan gods. It was looked at as being the same thing.
Did the word savage exist at that time?
I don't know if they used the word savage, but they used the word heathen. And to them, heathen, like Moor, Muslim, was also used to apply to the Indians. So they looked at them as pretty much the exact same, as being enemies of Christendom. Other questions?
You had people at the base of the pyramids, right, waiting for the food?
Yeah.
Who were the people that were being sacrificed?
Usually captives of war, people that had been defeated in battle, or people like we talked about with the Garland Wars that were just unlucky. The Aztecs decided that this month they're going to declare war on you. And you know you can't beat them, but you go out and fight them anyway because it's an honor thing. You have to protect your family. And then when they beat you, then what they would do is they would take all of the obsidian blades out, and that way it just becomes a club. And basically Aztec warriors would rank up by how many captives they had taken. And so that's largely what they would do, is they would basically take less than lethal weapons. They would take the tips off their darts, for example, so that it would stick in you, but it wouldn't kill you. And then that way they can take you hostage and they can sacrifice you. Usually war captives. And basically, people from the surrounding areas that were just unlucky to get war declared on them. And the Aztecs had a warrior class. They had basically animal spirits, and they believed that when you got to a certain level, the spirit of that animal would reside within you. So the lower classes were known as the eagles, and they basically would wear eagle feathers and a beak. They would literally dress up like a giant eagle, and they would run around in battle, and they would go, caw. They would actually sound like an eagle, because they felt that they were actually the spirit of that animal. The jaguars were, as far as the Spanish were concerned, were the elites. They would actually wear jaguar skins. And when you would talk to them, they would growl at you like a cat. And they believed that they were actually the animal. They were actually the savage nature of that species. And that those were the guys that were the best of the best. And you had guys that dressed like owls and guys that dressed like other stuff too.
You touched on the intermarriages or interbreeding or
Yes.
whatever. How many expeditions did Hernan Cortez conduct? And how long was it before Spanish women came into Mexico?
One. He basically had the one that went along the coast, but that one doesn't count as far as the conquest of Mexico. That was for a separate reason. That was just to explore the coast. The second one is basically to get vengeance on one of the tribes that defeated him, and that's the one he uses to conquer Mexico. Basically, as far as Spanish women, Spanish women really weren't encouraged to go to the New World because it was looked at as being a step down from being in Europe. Europe was looked at as where it was happening, and if you ended up going to meet your husband in the New World, you were considered a lesser status. All right, and so largely, even as we see through Mexican history, there's these multiple classes that play into it. You've got the Peninsulares, people born in Spain. They're the top of the top. The people that are born in the New World, those are the Creoles, right? And those are the middle, you know. They're the top in the New World, but they're still looked at as being below a Peninsulare. And then at the bottom, you've got the Mestizos, the Mulattoes, the people that have got Indian blood. And then at the very bottom, you've got people that are solely Indian blood. And that, so largely, most of these guys had wives back home in Spain, but they also took Indian wives. And the idea was, because they're heathens, we're bringing them to Christianity. And what better way to do that than through love?
Of course.
So they're sharing it. It's really funny because one of the guys writes home and his wife is talking about, she's complaining about how he has been away for so long, because a lot of these guys will be away for 2-3 years. And he says, I'm sharing the gospel. Which is really interesting. It's how they called it. They were men and they had needs and they fulfilled those needs. And the good thing about most of the Indian women was their husbands just died untimely deaths, trying to fight the Spanish, and so happens that they're available. So that's where you start to see the intermixing of populations.
How old was Cortez?
Cortez has been in his 30s, mid-30s.
How long did they give their name Tenochtitlan and stick up referring to this land as Mexico?
There's references to it until the 1730s. It's kind of similar to Constantinople and Istanbul. Even today, if you go to Istanbul, some people still call it Constantinople, which is interesting. There's still references to Tenochtitlan until the 1720s. But what happens is you can't have a capital on the site of a pagan capital because that's pagan and it's been influenced by terrible rituals. So they decide to build Mexico City on top of it. And that process takes about 20-30 years to actually construct the actual city on top. And the problem is that because that area was a shallow lake bed, even to this day, if you go to Mexico City, the central cathedral, central parts of the city, every year they sink about 3 millimeters, 4 millimeters. I mean, not much, but every year it's gradually sinking because when the Spanish filled those lakes in, they're looking for gold. They don't have time to do civil engineering. They're not going to make it so this thing is fixed properly. They just got a bunch of Indians and threw some mud on it and said, all right, build the city on there. Yes?
Well, back to talking about when coming over, didn't Cortez's wife, Catalina, come pretty early on from Cuba? His first wife that he was accused of killing.
Yeah. Sometimes they did.
And women came with her.
Sometimes. But it was looked at for a woman of stature that you were downgraded to go to this heathen place. So you had to either be really devoted to your husband, which Catalina supposedly was according to the sources. But
Yes, well, her sister also came with her. She's one of my ancestors.
yeah.
Whatever happened to Malinche?
Malinche?
She had 2 sons from Cortez, or?
Well, it's interesting because Cortez's story is a little bit different. Cortez says I never touched her, and yet she got pregnant 9 months. At 9 months later, she gave birth. Because my wife's here, so he basically, when he would talk to his wife, he'd say, I didn't touch her. He ended up giving her to one of his commanders, and she ended up obviously having children by him as well. So she had children not only by Cortez, quote unquote, but he also had children by one of his other men. So that ended up being her.
Was she given any compensation?
She was baptized as a Christian, and she was renamed Maria. And so references to her as Malinche stop after that point. Now, she has lived on in Mexican history because a Malichinista is a traitor. to your cause. And basically she's looked at as being
Even the word
the bad guy. Yeah, because she betrayed her own people because Cortez told her to. But you gotta keep in mind too that she was a woman in a difficult position. If she didn't do what Cortez asked, he could have killed her or did worse. So it's one of those things where, you know, I mean, we like to judge her now, but you know, being a woman in 1500s, things weren't quite as simple.
They were looking for gold, but for any of those men actually exploring and mapping and anything.
She had engineers, and they did actually chart paths and that kind of stuff. And there's some evidence of them building roads, building bridges, that kind of stuff. But nothing on a permanent basis, because most of, I think, what Cortez was thinking is let's get in and get out. Let's get the money and let's get out.
Were they keeping journals or?
Yeah. Bernal Diaz is probably the best example. And his conquest of Mexico is one of the most widely read first-person accounts. Cortez has his examples. He had a diary of sorts that he would write in, but most of it's missing for interesting reasons.
Did they take the clergy with them, and the clergy were trying to, or none?
They did.
So they could get the information.
Yeah, they had. I believe they were I think they were Franciscan friars with them, mostly to cater to the men's spiritual needs, but also to spread the word as necessary. The Tlaxcalan king was converted to Christianity, although he didn't really know what that meant. But he was happy that that had happened because he saw that's what I need to do to be allies with Cortez, so I'll do it. There was a full ceremony where he actually ended up dressing up like Jesus. And they had they put him on a cross. They didn't actually put the nails, but they tied him up and stuff. And he's just sitting there the whole time really confused. He's like, if this gets me an alliance, I guess I'll just keep doing this. Right? But they did that kind of stuff.
And when they were churches, and the Indians were putting their pagan gods, hiding them in the buildings.
They would tear the temples down and build a church on top.
I'm talking about Andres de Tapia wrote. He wrote it a little later. He wasn't writing it as they were going along, but he was one of Cortez's third in charge. And he wrote, it's published, you can still buy it today. And he wrote about the whole thing, you know, from his perspective. Actually, he even says that St. James came to their aid in one of those raids, and that's why they
Santiago.
Yeah. So it's very interesting. I bought it and I've read it. So it's from a different perspective. Everybody's got their own perspective.
Years back, I read the account of Bernal Diaz, and what I found interesting is he actually noted and listed the names of the soldiers in the expedition and the officers and the duties that they had. And he mentioned that certain individuals were there as accountants for the king because there was an agreement between the king and Cortez as to the percentages that they were going to, acquire from the take, I guess. But there was also an accountant for the church, evidently. See, so it'd be interesting. I need to go back and revisit the book and see all of that.
Yes.
You mentioned that some of Cortez's documents were missing.
Yes.
For obvious reasons. What were the obvious reasons and what were the documents?
Some of them were censored by the church because they contained details of pagan rituals. The church did not want people to repeat those rituals, so those were burned, because that was looked at as heresy. The other aspect is that Cortez wasn't alone. There were other people, like the governor of Cuba, that had a major grudge against Cortez. And later on, when Cortez conquers what's known as the viceroyalty of what eventually is going to be Mexico, he doesn't get the command of the area that he conquered. Somebody else from Spain gets it, because the governor of Cuba writes to the king to make sure that Cortez doesn't get the job that he's supposed to get. So Cortez ends up being like third in command of the area that he actually conquered by himself. So much of those accounts were edited because later on, people that were friendly to either Velasquez or to others would make sure that stuff didn't get in, especially stuff that was really favorable to Cortez. Even when you read Cortez's stuff, it doesn't really always show him in a favorable light. And it was probably edited by people later on who wanted to destroy his reputation. Because the conquistadors were rivals amongst themselves because they wanted to be the guy who did everything. I'm the guy who led the cavalry charge. I'm the guy who did this. And a lot of times they would undermine Cortez's role for his own personal values.
They're really-
I forgot.
The genealogy of Hernán Cortez's descendants from Mexico
Yeah.
published somewhere or in the internet?
That's a good question. I'm sure there probably is. He was a famous enough individual.
Mhm.
Have you seen anything about
Yeah,
how
it's
far it
in
goes?
several books, yeah. I don't remember their titles. And also the genealogy of Montezuma, because Cortez had a relationship with one of Montezuma's daughters.
All right, I'll talk briefly about the soldier's perspective. So you can see what I've got all this stuff on. Obviously, I'm dressed like a soldier that would be in the expedition. All right, so one of Cortez's common soldiers. I'm not a wealthy individual, but I'm not a poor individual. Most of the poor individuals, they probably didn't wear any armor at all. Right? We tend to think of the Spanish with their glittering helmets and lots of iron, etc. But actually, the vast majority of men in Cortez's command did not wear metal armor. Only the guys at the upper and middle ends of the spectrum could afford it. This is a breastplate, right? This part right here, it is made of solid steel. The steel that was looked at as the best was steel from Toledo, Spain, because it was looked at as being the best quality. It would, obviously in today's money, would be about $6,000. So you had to have some money and some wealth to be able to afford this. The guys that served under Cortez's command were not given standardized stuff. They had to provide all of their own equipment. And depending on how much equipment they invested in, they got a larger share of the spoils at the end. So obviously cavalry guys, they could claim 2 soldiers because you've got yourself and you've got the horse. The horse actually had a name and the horse was actually listed on the muster roll. So the horse got a share of the spoils and you got a share of the spoils. All right? So obviously, if you've got more armor, if you've got better stuff, you're going to be a higher class soldier. You're going to get a little bit more wealth. But you're also taking a risk. You know, there's always the risk that you could get killed. This would be basically a guy that was what was known as a rodolero. All right? Rodoleros were basically like swordsmen. And they'd emerged in the 1500s, particularly in the Spanish system, because in European warfare, everything was about literally 13, 14-foot long spears called pikes. And literally almost all warfare revolved around people with humongous pikes just literally stabbing at each other until the other side was finished. Now to supplement this, because obviously most people have got pikes, which are only effective at close range, you would also have gunners. So you would have basically guys using firelock muskets that they would basically fire in battle. And these guys would go to the front and fire. And then when the both sides got really close, those guys would come back through the lines and the pikes would go forward and then they would basically fight. Okay, so basically it was a mix. The Spanish called it the tercio, which was the most effective formation of its time. Right? Tercio meaning 3 different kinds of weapons. You had your pikemen, which defended against cavalry. You had your firelocks, which defended against infantry. And then lastly, you'd have some kind of special unit, which was more known as rodoleros. Right? The Spanish had always been big in what was known as the sword and buckler. And so basically a rodolero was somebody who would carry a shield and would carry a sword. Right? This is your shield, as you can see. Right? This is your sword. All right? This is what is known as an espada ropera, or a side sword. Right? It is about 4 pounds altogether. But it's not like so heavy that you can't, I mean, you can swing it pretty effectively, you can slash with it, you can cut with it. Obviously your defensive formation is to sit like this, and you use your shield to try to block any kinds of attacks, like you can shift like this, you can go over the top, right? You can stab, you can swing. Basically it can be used for both. This is not a time period when you see the real flimsy looking things, which we call rapiers. You know, the real tiny foil things that you start seeing like in Shakespeare's time. That's not what Cortez's guys would have been carrying. This was a transitional period in between the High Middle Ages, right, and the Renaissance period. So the swords have got features of both the Renaissance and features of the Old Middle Ages, particularly the long blade, right? This thing's primary responsibility was to break pikes, right? In the Spanish system, the rodoleros would run to the front when the 2 pikes would engage, and they would get in between the pikes, and they would basically just go in and cut the tips off all the enemy's pikes. So that way, when the Spanish went to push forward, the other enemy's got 6-foot pikes, and you've got 12-foot pikes. It's going to put you in an advantage. So basically, these guys were like shock infantry. If there's a hole in the enemy's formation, these guys would charge in and run in there at close quarters and stab. And so that's basically what a Guerrillero would do. They were of significant use in the New World because the vast majority of Cortez's soldiers were armed like this, about 90%. This is the kind of equipment that you would see on most of those guys. Again, most of them would have armor like this, with a breastplate, maybe a collar, maybe a helmet, if they could afford one. Interestingly enough, a lot of Cortez's guys actually bought cotton jackets, very similar to what the Indians would have worn. So there really wasn't a big difference between some of them. So it was a form of embarrassment even in the 1600s.
It's pulling your pants down.
The most interesting display at the Crown Jewels was the armor of King Henry VIII.
Oh yeah.
Have you seen pictures?
I have seen it. Yeah, there's no compensating at all in that picture.
Your point, well made.
Yeah.
He was the proudest man in that.
Yeah. It is a very, very large codpiece and it's very pronounced.
This is around.
He was proud of
Yeah, he is very proud of
Okay.
himself.
Do you ever do the Roman Legion there?
I do, all right, let me see if I can do them all. I do a Greek hoplite from Persian War. I do a Roman centurion in Julius Caesar's army. I do,
Soldado?
what?
Mexican
I do
soldado?
Mexican soldado. I do Civil War. I do a Civil War Marine. I do this one, 5, 6. Viking. I do a Viking presentation with a large shield. Revolutionary War. The Revolutionary War.
What about the Renaissance? Do you do anything with the Renaissance?
This is my Renaissance outfit. This is what I do for Renaissance. I do full plate knight with a longsword, a German longsword knight, and then my last one I do is a Knight Templar. I do a Knights Templar impression. So those are the 9. I think I got 9. So I stay busy. Especially during Easter time, I use the Roman costume a lot. Because I have to kill Jesus for every weekend for about 3 weeks. Just 3 weeks in a row. So.
So your closet is bigger than most of the women in here.
Yeah, I've got a lot of mannequins. So if anybody tries to break in my house, they're just gonna be really freaked out. It looks like there's just soldiers standing guard everywhere. So.
Have you been on Boca Chica?
No.
Because there's some house, if you've ever driven by, and you'll see out knights outfits
Really?
in the window.
That's interesting. Yeah, I don't
On Boca
Boca
Chica,
Chica.
a little bit further down from HEB, on your right-hand side.
Yeah, on Boca Chica Boulevard?
Yes.
So I take it you're not from here, from the valley?
What's that?
I take it you're not from the valley.
I moved here about 4 years ago. And I've lived in Brownsville for about the last 2 years. But I originally lived here in Harlingen.
Where are you originally from?
I'm from Keokuk, Iowa.
Iowa.
Yeah. And I'd never come down here as a winter Texan. I didn't even know Brownsville was in the United States. When I first came down, and then I interviewed for the job, and the whole point of the interview was so I could go to South Padre Island, and I got the job. So I was like, well, the good news is I got the job. Bad news is we didn't get to go to South Padre Island. So I got to see it later, so it's all good. But I really enjoyed living here. Obviously, it is a little bit of culture shock from where I came from, but the food is great. People are much more friendly. We always used to talk about how Midwestern people were really friendly. I didn't have conversations or even make eye contact with anybody most of the time. Down here, everybody wants to come up and talk to you, help you. So it's been a very pleasant change for us.
No Spanish there?
What's that?
A little bit of Spanish?
Little bit, yeah, un poco. I do a little bit, but when it comes to like people that get really excited, and oftentimes being a reenactor, you deal with really excited people because they're like, oh, this is really cool, and then I'm like sitting there like, slow down. I just use present tense verbs. Haven't really got into past tense yet because I can't do all the endings. So I just do present tense on everything.
Do you like Mexican food?
What?
Do you like Mexican food?
I love Mexican food. I loved the Mexican food before I came here, and then I realized what real Mexican food was. It was far better. Taco Bell was my standard. I think the first time I ordered a beef burrito, someone just looked at me and was like, "What?" So, after a little bit of getting used to it, I found out it's good. As far as heat, I can only tolerate a little bit of heat. So like for me, like Chipotle is about as hot as I'm gonna get. So like no ghost peppers or other kinds of stuff. I don't do that.
Do you have family coming up?
Tamales with the leaves on?
Yeah. We've had banana leaf ones that were really very tasty.
With the leaf?
Yeah.
You didn't wrap it?
I don't know. Somebody else made it, gave it to me, said, "Here, try this," and I said, "Yeah, it tastes good to me." Anything else?
Welcome to South Texas, we love you.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much.
We want to thank you for taking time to present to us, and we have a certificate for you.
You got some? Okay.
Very cool. All right. That's great. Thank you very much. Yeah, if anybody wants pictures, etc., come on up.
Okay. Me and him.